Thank you, Lukas, so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. I think I open up a new field now. There are a lot of links to the talks this morning. And also I think one link to the talk of Hubert, it's maybe the occupation with prefabricated architecture and housings. In the following 20 minutes, I will try to give you a brief insight of my interdisciplinary work. That is all about architecture and space. And then I will show some work of my students and give an insight in my teaching practice. So I show you a lot of pictures, and on the same time I will tell you something about it, and if there are any questions to the project, so I will be delighted to answer them later on. What is important for my work is maybe the background, also the biographical background. So I will talk a little bit about that. Because the background of my work is that I studied architecture, art, and media and cultural studies in Berlin. I went to Berlin in the 1990s, and this is also a very pregnant experience for me. And then I started teaching in 2000 in several universities and art schools, which is also an important experience. And since 2007, I'm now in Stuttgart at the Art Academy. And I also, this is also a special thing, I'm director at the Weissenhof Institute, which is an interdisciplinary platform at the Academy that gives me the opportunity to organize symposia and make publications. And the focus is on interdisciplinary studies. I'm thankful, Lukas, for this symposium, because I think that we actually need to question and to reflect and update our creative practice with the space and in space, as well as our teaching methods and training models in art schools and universities, because if you talk with other people who are here, also from other countries, we are all agree that this is a big challenge at the moment. There are a lot of changes in educational systems and so on, and so I think it's really time to discuss that. Also because our way of living, our way of working, our way of communicating, of learning and teaching changed radically in the past 20 years. New technologies, the consolidation of a global market, political impositions, and the continuous and massive acceleration of data and information flow is speeding up our whole day life and is expanding our operating range. These changes cause a deep impact on our needs, on our way of understanding, reflecting, and last but not least, on the way of designing our daily and future environment. The changes of daily life are essential for my own art practice and fundamental considerations in thinking and designing space. Of course, the own practical work is one of the central bases for a range of knowledge that teachers may convey to the students. I primarily work with places of transition whose past has a strong impact on history and whose future is uncertain. When I moved to Berlin after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1990, the quick dismantling of GDR culture was omnipresent. The successive disappearance of cultural and commercial goods, the racing change of urban space in East Berlin gave me a cause to confront myself with the parameters of cultural identification and to explore the problems and potentials there. The forceful transformation of Berlin that continues to warp its urban continents in the most varied of ways became an important topic of my artistic work in the 90s. I have to stick a little bit on my text because my English is not so like the others. I'm not a native speaker. You heard it already with the accent. So with fundamental research, I try to find out the beginning of spatial codes, their meaning and function, etc. Like Roland Barthes' definition of structural practice, strukturalistische Tätigkeit, I disassemble these codes and elements and rebuild them in different ways to know more about the relevance of the combinations and compositions and the complexity of the complete texture and structure of architecture. There is no absolute space. Space relates to our individual perception concerning questions of design or Gestaltung. That is to say, there cannot be any perfect solution and any universal concept. If we want to handle current essential environmental questions and need to find innovative approaches, we have to develop individual design strategies which are based on our individual understanding of space. The development of new technology approaches the issues of how urban space constitutes virtual space and how virtual space elements transform real space. In works like Outside In and Virtual Interiors, I will show this as an example. One could say that these works, this is a strategy of urban hacking that stacks real and virtual space or simply conjoins them. These works address less the practical tweaking of structural substance or the illegal appropriation of space. It rather alludes to the question how to identify urban and architectural structures and codes. Thus, my understanding of experimental work with space is characterized by conceptual considerations and versatile studies on perception, motion, form. Instead of the application of supposedly vulnerable solutions, the experiment and the process are in the focus of design and draft theory. Theoretical analysis and conceptual considerations build an equally important basis for design practice as the experimental handling of different material, media, and its specific techniques. Architecture as a hybrid discipline is the so-called mother of arts, embraces different artistic and scientific disciplines. It has always been a hybrid discipline that demands and combines a broad spectrum of competence from architects and has expanded in its scope of duties in the last several years. The design and construction of space does not only play a role that is literally supporting a constructed environment, but more and more in the design and construction of virtual spaces, as for instance, with information architecture, in virtual cities and computer games, but also in art, in urban interventions, in exhibition design, in scenography, and so on. This range of opportunities is a chance for graduates to apply their talent and competence in designing space throughout the borders of the building industry in a market that constantly changes. These changes have also an effect on gaining and transferring knowledge and on an educational system and strategies. Training posts have to stay abreast of those changes because the content of teaching today is the groundwork for an expert knowledge of tomorrow. So how to deal with these changes, especially at art schools and universities, which today find themselves in a permanent dilemma. They fluctuate between maintaining and continuing an existing tradition and the desire to break with this tradition. Before we break traditions, we have to be aware of them. What kind of traditions and current models are we talking about? What can we learn from former avant-garde concepts? What should we deny? Therefore, I organized 2 years ago a symposium to discuss the Bauhaus as a model. It was the 90th anniversary. As a kind of avant-garde tradition, as well-known and frequently mythologized model of art education, whose fragments are still remaining in some curricula of art schools all over the world. But this would be another lecture. I'm actually teaching experimental design and Gestaltung in the Department of Architecture and Industrial Design at the Academy of Art and Design in Stuttgart. It is the only class at the whole academy where students from different fields are trained programmatically together. Gestaltung is a genuine German expression with a certain tradition and role in the education of applied arts. The course Gestaltungslehre is a descendant of the Vorkurs at the Bauhaus, which you see here. in which artistic skills from the basic knowledge for the applied arts like architecture and design. Gestaltungslehre is an innovation of the avant-garde of the 20th century and in itself the most integrative and interdisciplinary subject at the academies until today. The professors are mainly artists and sometimes also related to applied art. Due to my education and practice in arts, architecture and design and also cultural and media study, I am able to research to a wide-ranging knowledge that is compulsory for an interdisciplinary teaching. In his book, The Language of New Media, Lev Manowitsch supports the assumption that the design principles of the Bauhaus and the avant-garde only attained wide-scale acceptance with the development of digital media. According to this theory, the Bauhaus is not only a historical role model haunting the buildings of all colleges and of art and design, but in graphic form it also encountered on every user interface. Indeed, what we know as design today evolved with and in the combination of art and industry at the Bauhaus. Le Corbusier once said, das Problem ist die Form, nicht ihr Ursprung. That means the problem is the form, not its beginning. Due to Nietzsche's once formulated insight of media theory, that the instrument will always play its part in writing our ideas, one could answer Le Corbusier today that it's the other way around. In contrast to the beginning of the 20th century and the idea of a universal artistic practice with higher art and design principles beyond human nature, today we have to deal with highly different individual tasks and living concepts. There is no universal form we have to believe in or think about, but we have to consider the content and the impact of formation and new geometries and their potential in urban life. Technical media, particularly digital tools, have developed a key function in design, communication, production, and distribution. Media competency is a wide-ranging ability which we now have to consider in a previously inconceivable form. Rather than adopting a viewpoint that ignores history and identifies one single approach as the correct, path-breaking approach, we need to offer a wide spectrum in our teaching. Meaning, when we refer to digital media, we also need to be aware of the importance of analog media and teach both competencies. The development of new technologies, especially the computer, means that for the first time the technologies of art, design, production and distribution have come together in one medium. Today this link-up prompts the much repeated yet altered question of innovation in production processes and its significance for design competencies, since the innovation of mass customization and design on demand is based on a merging of serial production technology and individual customer wishes. This goes much further than what began in the Bauhaus and has been common practice in the car industry for several years now. Instead of arguing about taste and the beauty of forms, we have to think about new concepts of life in a changing society and environment, and its consequences for the design of space to live in. Referring to this, we have to understand the quality and relevance of closeness and distance, of privateness and publicity, of foreignness and security, of movement and stagnancy, of the environmental value and the significance of identity. Those essential questions and thoughts rise beyond disciplinary boundaries and discussions about a perfect and universal form. The design of architecture and living space does not only touch questions of structural engineering, economy, and sociology, but also of perception, psychology, of conceptual thinking, representation, artistic practice, and of media theory like cultural techniques. With the integration of these different disciplines into teaching, new perspectives are introduced, like interweavings and the blurring of boundaries of various approaches and strategies uncover potentials to capture our environment in an unfamiliar manner, to think about space differently, and to design it innovatively. My teaching concept stands for the integrative connection between different fields. It may point out future-oriented niches in an occupational field continuously become more versatile, may also convey competencies that lead beyond a vulnerable architecture education. My courses try to link between free and applied art by pointing out specific differences and borders, as well as analogies, intersections, and possibilities. My teaching conveys the handling and knowledge about free and applied artistic disciplines and practices, which especially broaden the range of design competencies and give added weight to the artistic character of architectural education. Thereby, the interlocking of different disciplines is indispensable. Each approach to design, either in a free or in the applied arts, is a dynamic process. In teaching, we convey design practice as a process which does not primarily orient towards a stated goal, but which reflects on the possible and feasible versatility of places, spaces, and objects, and on our perception. Some topics and methods I showed you in the slides were the motion of space, blind date experiments with sensory perception in urban space. Methods are, for example, transferring knowledge about different media and techniques in representation, analog and digital. Strategies to handle different dimensions, from object to group to urban space to global connections, experiments in 2 and 3 dimensions, the way of abstraction, confrontation of conventional methods, and leading to astray experimentally. The learning, or we'll say after Martha's talk, the informal learning units are accompanied by an interdisciplinary lecture series and symposia. All these occasions, events, artists, architects, designers, and scientists present their work, as well as the ideas, methods, materials, and techniques that determine the design processes. It is also a matter of new structural models in teaching, as an increasingly complex world. Oh, moment. That was a very nice effect I wanted to... Oh, there's something missing. That's really a pity. It was funny. No, I missed my concept. It is also a matter of new structural models in teaching, as an increasingly complex world means that the essential spectrum of competencies is constantly expanding in all areas of life and work. Contemporary teaching models, but above all these tenable for the future, are challenged to react to developments and therefore to offer an immediate and extended range of content. The future, or let's say the art of thinking and designing space, lies in the reflection on the possible and not in the execution of the feasible. Unconventional settings of tasks and questions allow unconventional approaches and solutions. The concentration on the process and on the experiment supplies the needed space for an intense analysis of the practice of designing and drafting. Here, the journey as an individual discovery of social and aesthetic practices is the destination.
Thank you so much, Annett. It was a beautiful lecture, and I think now we've needed quite a good circle of the various positions that we look at. Before we go to the panel, chance for you to ask a couple of questions to Annett from the audience. For the moment not. What I highly appreciated, I think we both come kind of from the same way, also the background in cultural studies. I kind of never studied architecture, but ended up in the same field. And you mentioned here architecture as the mother of arts, and it's almost like a birth-giving discipline where all kinds of different approaches can come together. When did first come this realization? Or did you start with architecture and went to the cultural studies, or did you always have these two next to each other? When was this kind of spatial enlightenment for you?
I think this architecture is really a heritage, a familiar heritage. So this is my familiar background, and so I never wanted to do something with architecture. But at the end, I started then after some design, art. I first studied art, and then I came to architecture because everything I did was about architecture, so I couldn't get rid of it. And during my studies at the University of Arts in Berlin, I realized that there is something missing for me. It was the theoretical thinking. It was thinking about architecture to go deeper in the subjects and so on. And I couldn't get it at the university. So, and I couldn't get it in the field of architecture, in the practical field. So I studied at the Humboldt University, media studies, and there I got all my inspirations for the work I did later on. It all came together.